Hi everyone, Daljit here from Astrolab 21. Welcome back to our ongoing series on an introduction to the human design system. This is part 6. I think this is going to be the final part of this introduction series. And today we're going to talk about profile, which is a very fun and interesting aspect of the human design system. So without further ado, we'll jump right in. And the title of this profile, role playing, right? The profile in our human design is a way of determining the role that we're meant to play in this life, which is really fun. It starts to, as I kind of hinted at in the last episode, this way of creating a story of our lives as the movie of our lives. And this is a way that we can characterize the role that we play as unique individuals living our true selves. Now, another title I could have used for this is the costume of our purpose, which is another way that's used to describe profile. I think this comes directly from the differentiation book that I referenced earlier as a good reference guide. But, you know, the role, the costume, how do we present ourselves in the world? And so essentially there are 6 fundamental roles in the human design system. And you can see in this graphic here, as we learned in the first episode about reading hexagrams, and this is based on the hexagram structure, right? We always read it from the bottom up, so 1 through 6. And the 6 roles are the investigator, the hermit, the martyr, the opportunist, the heretic, and the role model. And there is a sort of, it's kind of a hierarchy. There's a movement that goes from the first line up to the 6. And the roles has a resonance with the structure of the hexagrams. And what we're getting into is the line level of each hexagram. And it's something we haven't explored yet. But as we know from when we built the Rave Mandala, every gate is broken up into 6 lines. And so here, what we're actually looking at, these roles come from the keynotes of the 6 lines of the 10th gate. And as we'll learn later, you know, the 10th gate in human design is the gate of the behavior of the self. It really does describe the role that we're meant to play. So we extrapolate from that hexagram and the meaning of those lines to create these 6 roles. So there's a brief description of each one here, and I'll kind of walk through what each of these signifies. You know, the investigator we associate with introspection, the chameleon, and empathy. And essentially the first role, the first line, is all about foundations. Everything associated with first line themes, whether we're talking about a role or any keynote for any gate, it's all about that which establishes the foundation of that hexagram and its meaning or theme. Without a firm foundation, you can't really move through the rest of the hexagram. So investigators, people who are working through that role in life, are meant to investigate, go out into the world and figure it out, get to the bottom of things, investigate so that they can have a firm foundation. And what they're really looking for is a sense of security. Because that's what first lines do, is they establish a secure base, a foundation. And you can see, I should mention, we have a lower trigram and an upper trigram here. And again, we've learned this from how we looked at how all the hexagrams are constructed from this stacking of 2 successive trigrams, right? And there's an association in terms of looking at role where the 3 lines of the lower trigram are all personal focused. And the 3 lines of the upper trigram are transpersonal. So it's kind of a me and a we approach to life. So anything in the lower trigram is all very personally focused. They tend to be self-engrossed personality types. So the investigator would be of that first line personal approach. They're looking into the world to inspect and discover about themselves and the world by really getting a solid foundational analysis of what it's all about. So that's line 1. And once that foundation is established, here's where the sort of movement or the sort of quasi-hierarchy comes in. Then we can move to the second line, having established the foundation, and then the role of the hermit can say, thank you, investigator, for giving us a secure foundation. This allows me the freedom to really explore my own natural talents, to really discover my gifts. It's associated also with projection, the role of the Democrat. Essentially, they defer to others so that they can be left alone, right? And obviously the name the hermit would imply someone who wants to be left alone. Now I can mention here that there's something interesting about the sort of natural order of the hexagrams as well as we move up through the line numbers, is that the natural affinity for each line has a yin or yang value. I'm just doing this graphically, but we could also show it this way, which is first line is very yang, right? It's the investigator goes out into the world with that yang creative spirit to try to figure it all out. The second lines are naturally of a yin essence. So now the hermit, the natural, gets to be more introspective. It doesn't have to go out and find the security. It can be more discriminating and selective and tasteful, as we'll learn, that all these qualities of the hermit. So that's the second line. Then that moves into the third line. Again, also very focused on the self. This is an inward, rather introspective type of personality we're dealing with the hermit, as you might expect with such a name, right? Prefers to be left alone so that they can just do their thing. They're just really naturally gifted people who often don't even know how talented they are. And this notion of projection is really people project onto them because they recognize the natural talents of the hermit and they come in and say, hey, we want you to give us your gift and your talent. Bring it out, bring it on, right? And that's the hermit is really waiting for the right invitation to come and recognize their gifts and give them a situation and an environment where they can use those gifts. So that's the role of the hermit. And that sets up the third role, which is known as the martyr. And here we have trial and error, mutation, and adaptation. So here we're back to a yang line. So where the hermit was a little more introspective, the martyr now is going back out into the world, can now sort of leverage the natural talents that the hermit has established and really go put everything to the test. Trial and error. Third line personalities tend to bump into things in life, right? Or things in life bump into them. And they just learn by doing. There's no such thing as failing for a true martyr who is living by design, right? The failure or perceived failure is just a learning opportunity. And it's discovering what works and what doesn't. Martyrs are the great troubleshooters of the human design system because they will tell you what works and what doesn't. And they have this great sense of mutation, adaptation, right? All mutation occurs through the third line of every hexagram. It's another deep insight where we're talking about role here, but there's always another level with human design. And it's good to be able to appreciate. And once you can understand the way all these lines work, there are sort of recurring themes that can be applied in different ways. Here we're looking at the role. And the role of the martyr, the third line, is mutation and adaptation. It's always associated with the much more material or mundane aspects of any hexagram, this third line. Now, it's also the lower trigram, so it's personal. It's focused on itself. It has a lot of self-awareness. But the martyr actually, by virtue of its being connected to it's the last of the lower trigram, and it can kind of see into what's coming. It knows that there is this upper trigram here. With the 1 and the 2, they aren't even aware that there's an upper trigram. They're so kind of focused on themselves in a lot of ways, on that personal pursuit. The martyr has this understanding that there is another level here. It's another metaphor that Ra used to use is that it's like the hexagram is a house, and it has a first floor and a second floor, right? And so the investigator's there. He's probably in the basement, really trying to make sure the foundation is solid and there's no cracks in it and there's no leaks and everything is secure, right? And the hermit's sort of in the first floor. They're in the living room. The window's open, but they aren't even concerned with anything going on outside. They're just involved in their own process of creativity and self-expression and personal discovery. People outside see into the window and say, hey, you're pretty talented. They're in there playing guitar or doing whatever they're doing, right? The martyr kind of is aware that there's a stairway to the second floor, right? And it's kind of the mutation and adaptation that they bring through their trial and error experience kind of sets the stage for a movement to this upper trigram, which leads and sets up nicely the fourth role, which is the opportunist. Externalizing, friendliness, abdicator, right? And again, some of this language is a little obtuse, I will admit. We're going to get into some better language in a minute here. And this is just the thing, this is, again, I've said this in previous episodes, the language of human design as it came through Ra, who was the original source and one and only source of this information, this knowledge, because he's the one that had the encounter, right? And he was a particular personality type, as we'll find. He was a 5-1, right? A heretic investigator. And he was an ego manifester, right? A splenic ego manifester. Last episode we talked about strategy and authority, right? So there's a certain quality to his language. And just like the human design system, it's very compressed. I think he was looking for that word that to him expressed the deepest and most resonant meaning of these roles, these lines, and these keynotes. For some, they find them a little off-putting. Some would term them as being negative, having negative connotations. So we have to be really careful when we look at the language. I greatly appreciate it. To me, it's like the Ra language is the orthodox, right? It's the OG, it's the original. It's in the original Hebrew or in the original Greek or Latin or Aramaic, right? And then there are new interpretations of it. We can get a King James version. We can get the New Word version, right? But I think it's valuable to study and learn it with the original language and then add the other interpretations on top. Just a little digression there, but it's something that's really important to me. I am a proponent of the involving language and a continued synthesis of this knowledge, but I also value and appreciate the original keynotes that were given by Ra because I think there's value in understanding the system from that perspective. So, which is why, something like the martyr and the hermit, right? A lot of people just kind of bump on those distinctions or those terms because they sound negative. No one wants to be a martyr or a hermit. Well, maybe you do. Anyway, so we're moving up to the upper trigram here. Now we're getting into transpersonal roles, right? Whereas the lower trigram is personal, focused on the self. The roles of 4, 5, and 6 are focused on the other. It's about being in relationship, being in community, being in, the entire collective, right? And we see this, again, there's this movement through the lines of the hexagram. So when we get to the fourth line, the opportunist, right? And here's another word that tends to have a negative connotation, for better or for worse, right? You're an opportunist, right? It seems like you're using people for a purpose. But if you look at it in terms of the language, you are just someone who recognizes opportunity and recognizes opportunity in these externalizing friendliness and, abdicator. Here's another word that Ra used that most people like, what the fuck's an abdicator? But you may have heard this term to abdicate the throne. This is someone who's willing to give up their power for the good of the group, to recognize the opportunity available to acting in cooperation, right? It's a very friendly, social type of role, as we're going to see. And again, we're back to a yin line, right? A little more receptive, a little more collective, right? This idea of warmth and friendliness and, getting along with other people, networking, socializing. Those are characteristics of a fourth line role. So that leads to the fifth line, which Ra termed the heretic. Okay? Again, another nasty term if, the people who get burned at the stakes. Like, I don't want to be a heretic. But what does the heretic bring? It brings this universalizing principle. It's again associated with projection. We see a sort of connection here to the two, and they are connected in a way. It's the role of the general. So what does the heretic do? Where the opportunist is social and networked, right? The heretic tries to universalize the theme of anything, of any hexagram it touches, right? The fifth line of any hexagram is the universalizing force. It's actually seen as the highest power. And like the traditional I Ching interpretations, if you read the Book of Changes, a lot of times they'll look to the fifth line to be the ultimate interpretation. The reason being is that the sixth is actually almost a divine role, like it's beyond human capacity. It's a different level altogether. It's beyond human, right? But when we get to the fifth, we really have whatever was the foundation in the first line and the natural talent that was built upon it and the experience of the trial and error, figuring out what's right, what's wrong, getting together in groups and sort of finding the opportunities of sharing the resources. The fifth then universalizes that and says, this is how this works. This is the best use of this, right? And there's another projection here. A lot of times the heretics get projected on as being saviors. They get recognized for their ability to solve problems, to bring solutions to problems. They often get called out only in times of crisis, when their services are needed. And then once they come in and help solve the crisis, they're forgotten about, right? They are, written off into the history books. And that's part of the role of the heretic, right? So that's a yang role. It's a very outward, kind of focused role, if you think of it that way. And then that sets up the sixth and final role, which is the administrator, optimist, peacemaker, right? The role model. And this is the exemplar of the entire hexagram, of any hexagram. Again, we can look at this in terms of analyzing any of the 64 hexagrams. They all play a role within their function, within the theme of each hexagram. That's a role, right? So here we're looking at sort of the perfection of the theme of a hexagram. It's the perfected idea. It's almost divine in a way, right? And the other thing about the role model and the sixth line in general is that it has a sort of the bird's eye view of things. It's up on the roof of the house. It can see beyond just the limits of any single hexagram, any single situation. And it can see the potential. And what it sees is the next hexagram, whether the six is looking at the next hexagram in the series of hexagrams, say the King Wen sequence, or whether it's looking across a channel to its harmonic gate at the other side and seeing what's available, right? It's a great perspective that the role model has. And there's also this flow. And something interesting as we've learned, by changing the hexagrams to this is sort of the natural configuration, yang, yin, yang, yin, yang, yin. And what we have here are two stacked trigrams. On the top we have water, and on the bottom we have fire. So we would read this as water over fire. This is actually hexagram 63, which is after completion. This is not kind of the end of the whole sequence. After you finish, you go back to the beginning. Everything is cyclical, right? So the 6 says go back to 1, go back to go, right? And you start over again. And this is a cyclical process that is being illustrated here. So those are the 6 primary roles that we all play. But when we talk about our role in our design, we actually have a dual role. Why do we have a dual role? Because we get a role for our personality and we get a role for our design, our mind and our body, right? As we saw in the third episode, the rave mandala, the body graph, is generated by two separate sets of data, two planetary activations, the body and the soul, right? So when we look at roles, what we can do is actually identify 12 different roles. And what you'll start to learn as you look at profile is that they're given as two numbers, 1/3 here. So that would be the first role, right? The investigator, martyr. And what this is indicating is, the way we read this is, the first number is the role based on our personality, which is conscious. The second number is the role based on our design, which is unconscious. So if we read this profile, the 1/3 has a conscious 1, they're consciously an investigator, but the unconscious is a 3, is a martyr. And again, the different personality profiles are divided by right angle personal destiny. This is sort of lower trigram. And then we have this very special juxtaposition, which is the fixed fate. Only one one profile is kind of unique among all the 12, which is this 4-1. And then we have 4 of the transpersonal or upper trigram destinies, the transpersonal destiny. And so you can see how the first number in these profiles is all from the upper trigram. Most of these are from the lower trigram, except for the 4-6. So the 4-6 and the 4-1 are kind of unique profiles. The 1-3 is unique in a way that we'll explore. But where does this come from? How do we get these two numbers? Well, if we go back to my chart example, remember when we looked at this in episode 3, what we are looking for is the line number for the personality sun and the line number for the design sun earth. So right here, my personality sun earth, we got a pair of 3s, and over here on the design sun earth, we got a pair of 5s. So that would determine my role. I'm a 3/5. My personality, my conscious role is a 3. My design unconscious body role is a 5. So go back to the list here, 3-5. That makes me a martyr heretic, right? And you talk about, two of the heaviest sounding roles in terms of the nomenclature. But I will tell you, it's like I resonated so much with human design as I came to it. There were so many synchronicities and resonances and things that just popped out in my design, in my body graph, in the keynotes. And this was one of them, the role of the heretic. First of all, I'm a product of Catholic school education, which I rebelled against quite a bit as a youth. And then, back in 2000, my creative partner and I formed a film company together. We were endeavoring to create documentaries that were really cutting edge and on topics that were really edgy, right? And so the name that I came up with for the production company was Heresy Films, and it was spelled Here-I-C, but it was a pun. It was kind of a play on words. It's heresy, right? That was my sort of nod to my my Catholic upbringing, and we were literally trying to explore somewhat heretical concepts. So when I came to human design, and it says, "Yeah, you're a martyr heretic," and I was like, "Yeah, fuck yeah, I am." So for some of us, maybe you resonate with this language. But that's my role that I play. And what does that mean, right? To be a martyr heretic, to be a 3-5. It means I'm conscious of this role of the martyr, right? And as we looked at it, was the third line, a yang line. It was all about trial and error. It's all about figuring out what works, what doesn't. You think about what a martyr does, is they point out what doesn't work. And they're willing to stand up and say, hey, this isn't working. Don't do that. Right? It's why they're the martyr. They're willing to go out and say, this shit's broke. This don't work. or this does work. Try this. I've done this by trial and error, right? And again, my entire life is trial and error. I've been mostly self-taught in almost everything I've done in life. And I've made a lot of mistakes learning how not to do shit, right? It's the only way I can learn. I've done so many things the first time I've done them. I do everything at least twice, right up to this day. Okay, so, one of the great things with coming to human design was like, that recognition that, yeah, that's how you do things. That's how you learn. That's your gift. That's your role. And you get to figure out what works and what doesn't. You literally bump into things, and things literally bump into you. Human design, it bumped into me. I bumped into it. Here I am, right? Figuring it out. So you can look at this list, and if you've done your chart, take a look at what your profile is. And, as we move up, just what we can learn from the hexagram structure and how predominantly these first 7 are what we would call, personal destiny. We call them right angle. I'm not going to get into the mechanics of how they are calculated. It just relates to the 88 degrees of the sun between the personality and the design activations in our chart. It's more technical than we need to know. We just need to know that we have these profiles at this stage, and to learn what they mean, what their symbolism, what their role is, and how to operate correctly within this role that we're given and we're meant to play. So, what you get is, normally with the lower, the first 7 profiles, that first role, that conscious personality role, is predominantly in the lower trigram. It's personal. And then predominantly your unconscious role is collective or transpersonal. So you're conscious of your personal role and you're unconscious of your transpersonal role. Like for myself, that martyr, I really get that, right? Like I know myself as the martyr, as the trial and error, figure it out as you go along, figure out what works, what doesn't. Now the heretic, the 5, is unconscious in me, so I might not recognize that skill in myself. I might not think of myself necessarily as a heretic, but clearly from the example I gave earlier, I do identify with this heretic role. But it could be that others would see that in me, and what you'll find is others may see your secondary role in you more than you see it in yourself. They recognize the talent that is unconscious, that is latent in the design. So, it's all, you can see what happens. The exceptions here is the 1-3. I'll just bring out these notable exceptions because they're interesting, right? This is the only profile where both the conscious and unconscious, the personality and design, are lower trigram. So the investigator martyr is all about the personal destiny, investigating, figuring out the foundation, right? It's yang, and then it's the martyr, and then it goes out and tries to figure out what works and what doesn't, and experiments in life. So this is a very unique role, whereas moving upwards, the 1-4, right? It's lower and upper. The 2-4, lower and upper. And so there's kind of a harmonic balance. So you get to the 4-6, which is unique because here you have 2 upper trigram roles, the opportunist role model, yet because of the geometry, it's still a personal destiny. So the 4-6 has a unique quality to it. The 4-1 is in a category unto itself, right? It's all about this fixed fate. And this is more language that I think I'm not going to dive into that on this episode, something we can talk about in the future. But suffice it to say that it's just a very unique profile, very rare. Not a lot of people have a 4-1 profile. And it's neither, personal nor transpersonal. It just has this, it's the juxtaposition, 3% of humanity. So this is pretty rare. And so the opportunist investigator is a unique role. And then when you get to the upper profiles, they all sort of follow the same rule, but flipped. They're conscious of their more transpersonal role, right? The 5 and the 6. And they're unconscious of their more personal role, the 1, 2, and the 3. So this is, basically the 12 roles that you can play. Now, there are other systems, or I should say, derivations of the human design system that have attempted to sort of use new language in order to describe these roles, which I think can be helpful. And I want to explore those. So, if you're someone, for instance, who's a 5-2 and really doesn't like the sound of being a heretic hermit, right? Even though that is a very accurate description of this role, right? The 5-2, who is someone who gets called upon to really universalize the theme. They're the general that gets called to solve problems, to step into times of crisis, right? But really, they're unconsciously, they just want to be left alone so that they can be a natural talent, right? So say, though, you just don't like that. Well, maybe, what if we said you were a wise talent? Would you like that better? Right? So here I'm using the language that comes from a website called 64keys.com. And these are founded by a couple of Europeans who had studied with Ra, were with him from, I think, one of the earlier years. And, they've started using human design in more business applications in the corporate world. And so some of the language that Ra used was really inappropriate to be used in that setting. So they had started to evolve the language and to find some synonyms and some similar words and descriptions that were a little more user-friendly, if you will. And I like them. I'm an advocate for this kind of evolution of the language. We've got the OG, we've got the Orthodox. Now let's get the new updated versions, because we don't want to create barriers to entry. And I think a lot of people, when they come to human design, either they're off-put by just the sheer volume of information, it's just too much and they're overwhelmed, or they're turned off by the language. Some of the words just, we've gotten really sensitive about language in the last few years. So I'm all for the evolution and the continued growth and integration that is offered by using some of these other language systems. So this is a good one, 64keys.com. So, they've changed all of these here. So now, if you look at mine, the martyr heretic is now an experienced problem solver. Now, that sounds proactive, right? And it's saying the same thing. That martyr who has gone through the trial and error is experienced. And the heretic, is a problem solver. He can come in and say, this is what needs to be done, and do it. We can call the 2-5 a selective problem solver. So now you're seeing the 2, when it's conscious, is selective, right? The 1-3, right? The investigator martyr is a confident change agent. That one investigation gives him confidence, or gives her confidence. Why? Because they are confident that they've gotten to the bottom of everything. They can establish a firm foundation. They feel secure, and that security gives them confidence. So then they can take that 3 energy and go out and be a change agent, a confident change agent. Or a 2-4, a selective networker, right? The 4-6, an influential role model, the influential authority of a 4-1, right? So take note of your profile if you know it, and see if one of these keynotes isn't a little more pleasing to your ears and your ego. And then the 64 keys actually goes on and identifies an archetype for each of these, right? So they take that combination, and what does that really exemplify? Well, we get the 1-3 as the hero, the 1-4, the confidant, the 2-4 is a diva, the 2-5, the luminary, the 3-5 is a troubleshooter, the 3-6, the individualist, 4-6, a fine mind, the 4-1 is the rock. I love this one. As far as I'm aware, I know of 1-4-1 in my life. And if you ask me about this person, I've said this, like, fucking solid human being. This guy is a fucking solid human being. And he really is a rock. He really is stable. Like, one of the most, stable, enduring, you just count on this guy for anything. So it's amazing. As you start to look at your own profile, the profiles of your friends and your family and those close to you, you probably find that a lot of this stuff just nails it in many cases. It's quite fascinating. So, we can use these now. I just did a reading, it was yesterday as a matter of fact, and it was a 6-2, right? And she just didn't really resonate with this role model hermit designation, right? So I was like, well, how about an exemplary talent? And, we were getting warmer, and then we got to guiding star, and she just kind of lit up. It was just, that's how she identifies with her role. And she's a healer, and she's a role model who's coming off the roof in the third part of her life, being called to be of service. And when we put her reading in that context, it just landed in a way that the role model hermit didn't. So this can be helpful, and I'm a big proponent of this. I'll share with you one other sort of way we can do it. This is the language of quantum human design, which is another one of these iterations that comes from one of Ra's longtime students. And she has also tried to, I think, take the language in a direction that's a little more palatable to a broader audience. And again, all for that. So she uses the idea of the first line as being a resource. The third line is an explorer. The second line is a responder. The fourth line is a stabilizer. The fifth line is a visionary leader. The sixth is an adept, right? So, in the example of my client, she's an adept responder. Just so true. She's a master, healer and practitioner. And she's, responsive to people's needs. She has she has the gift. She has the intuitive healing gift. I look at mine, explorer, visionary leader. I'm like, well, of course, that sounds amazing. I will say this archetype of the troubleshooter, it nails it. It's in my career and working in television, a lot of times I get called in at the last minute when a project has come off the rails. It's a shit show. And producers will call me in and say, fix it. And I'm the fixer a lot of times. So I always, if you're familiar with Pulp Fiction, the Mr. Wolf character, the wolf, right? He comes in and he's a problem solver. He's a troubleshooter. That's me. That's my role in a nutshell. I've played that role my entire life. So be curious for those, if you know your profile, and you take a look at some of these, what lands? I would love to hear it in the comments. I love the comments section. Tell me, these archetypes land? Are you a role model? Are you a heretic? Do you like the original language? Do you resonate more with some of these other systems that have sort of massaged the language to be a little more approachable? Really curious. So yeah, leave your profile in the comment below and let me know how you respond or resonate with that role, that identity. I'd be very, very curious. But I find it fascinating. Like I said, this is played out pretty much to a T in the readings I've been doing in the last year. I started with myself and my family and my close friends, and I've sort of been expanding out to colleagues, and I'm starting to do sort of first look overview readings for people, and I'm just finding this stuff just lands almost every time. It's pretty phenomenal. So, no matter what language we want to use, whether we use the OG or the evolved, an understanding of profile really gives us another dimension to how we can understand our body graph, understand our purpose, how to be ourselves. It gives us a role to play. So back here, the original language that we use, we could then just put all these new words in, right? And we could start to see how an investigator is a confident authority who acts as a resource, first line, foundation. A hermit is just a person who is selective, is talented, and is a responder, will respond to the call. When that projection comes, they will respond to those who recognize their very unique selective talent, right? They've got taste, right? The martyr is simply an experienced change agent who's an explorer, right? They use that trial and error, the mutation, in order to effect change. They're willing to go out there into the world and find out what works and what doesn't. The opportunist is an influential networker who has a stabilizing force, right? It makes sense. The heretic, this is a wise problem solver who plays the role of a visionary leader. Role model, an exemplary role model who's an adept, who is adept and is an adept, right? An adept is like, a wizard, right? In ancient and medieval times, the adept of alchemy was, the sort of master. Role models have this mastery, this exemplar type of quality. So whether we want to look at the original language, we want to look at the evolved language, it's all pointing to the same qualities that each of these roles bring. And there's a hierarchy, there's a movement through the hexagram that really gives us something very, very profound. So that's kind of a look at roles through profile. And so the next slide, the next video, I don't have a next video. Really, I think that's the intro, right? We've kind of gone over, I think, the basics in this 6-part series, and we've learned a lot. I think, if we want to recap just what we've come from, going back to my body graph here where we started, we learned how this whole thing works, right? This mandala wheel that starts with the zodiac and then adds these hexagrams and these gates and these lines, and that our planets, we get 2 sets of activations that activate the different gates and the different lines, and then activate channels and gates in the body graph, which create this amazing map, this circuit board, this map of our flow chart of our energy. We learned what we have through definition that's available. We learned where we are open to wisdom and also prone to being conditioned in our open centers, right? And this is the fundamental insight of the human design system, right? We learned about the 4 types, the manifestors and the generators and the manifesting generators, the projector and the reflector, the 4 different auras and the 4 different strategies, generators who respond, projectors who wait for the invitation, manifestors who inform, and reflectors who wait an entire lunar cycle, right? And from these 4 types and these 4 auras, we get 4 unique strategies, and we get signatures, right? When we're living correctly, when generators are correct, they're satisfied. When they're not, they're frustrated, right? Projectors, living correctly, success. Living as not self, bitter, right? Manifestors, living as themselves, peace, not self, anger. Reflectors, signature, surprise, right? Not self, disappointment. So there we have strategy. Then we also learned about the different types of authority. We identified 7 authorities, and we learned that they are hierarchical in nature, whereas the emotional authority is the highest authority. Anyone with a defined emotional center is an emotional authority, right? 50% of the population, right? They have no clarity in the now. They have to wait over time. The sacral with its, guttural yes-no response in the moment. The splenic with its in the now, intuitive, moment-to-moment, instinctual awareness. The ego, whether it's projected or manifested with its motor to either the throat or the G center, whether it can be empowered to initiate or it must wait for the invitation to bring its gifts. These other projector type, of authorities, whether they're self-projected or mental awareness, environmental projectors, and of course the rare lunar authority of the reflector type. And then we just did all the profiles with all the different ways that we can express these unique combinations of a conscious and unconscious expression. So, that's a lot, but that's the basics, and that's where you want to take your first, couple months, your first year. This is my first year. I'm going into my second year of this experiment. And again, that's the purpose. That's the approach, is enter into an experiment with this system. Try it out. See how it works. Experiment with strategy and authority. Figure out your type. What is your strategy? Right? Are you a generator? Are you supposed to wait for the wait for the world to come to you and respond to it? Right? Are you a projector who has to wait for the invitation before you share your wealth of gifts and talents and insights and penetrating awareness? Are you a manifester who just has to simply inform before you go and act and do what you were born to do? Are you one of those rare reflectors? You have to wait a whole lunar cycle to get in touch with the moon and really figure out all that openness that you have and get that sense of surprise. Figure out your authority. If you're emotional, right? Wait in your wave. Know truth in the now. Patience, time, right? Or your sacral or splenic, and all of the ways that we discussed about how you approach. It will change your life. I guarantee you will have a profound impact just by sort of taking those strategy and authority approach, which is why in the human design system, that's kind of the mantra. Just that you can always go back to that. It's a corrective too. If you get lost, right, you can get too deep, you can get sidetracked, you get not self. It's easy to do. You can get conditioned to get thrown off your game. Just come back to that track, strategy and authority, strategy and authority. And then really start to learn your own body graph, study your chart. Really, read up on what are the channels? What are these gates? What do I have defined? Do I have a split definition? Am I a single definition? Am I a triple split? There's all these different configurations. What are my open centers? Where am I susceptible to being not myself? Where can I get conditioned? Eye-opening, really. Even for myself, as someone who's been studying astrology deeply for 20 years. And, this is no, astrology, I think I still use it. I use these two in tandem. Again, I think there's a synthesis and an integration here. But there are just things you can see in the human design chart that astrology isn't going to show you. Vice versa. There's things in looking at houses and aspects that human design won't give you. But I've been really, really impressed with the practicality of this system, and that's always something I really appreciate and look for. Is it's got to be useful. Like, can I use this? It's like theoretical is great, but when the rubber meets the road, is this something I can actually use in my everyday life? And I think the answer here with human design is a resounding yes. Very practical, the mechanics of the Maya. It's a mechanical function. And when you can see that perspective, boy, it just opens up a lot of possibilities. So I hope you've enjoyed these first 6 episodes. I've really enjoyed producing them, sharing them with you. And now, as a manifesting generator, I'm excited to share with you all of the other nuances because, we've got things like incarnation crosses, and you've got the global cycle programs, and we've got substructure. There's a whole world that sits beneath the body graph, and the mechanics of that get incredibly fascinating. Advice on diet and environment, and it's psychology, health and wellness. It's really quite a robust and rich. I keep thinking that it's very rich. This rich, compressed synthesis is how I described it. So more to come. Again, hope you're on board. Hope you're liking and subscribing. Comment. Let me know. What's your type? What's your strategy? Where are you in your experiment? Are you brand new to it? Is this encouraging you to try it out? Get your chart. Go to one of these online services. Have it as a bookmark. Reference it. Print it out. I started drawing my own chart just by hand, just to sort of get a feel for it. I'm just an old-fashioned mechanical guy that way. There's lots of ways you can engage with your chart, and I encourage you to do so. So, yeah, till next time, Sat Nam, everyone.